Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you here on Tag Tuesday. I've got the rad pad all fired up here, and it's a tag. I love it. I absolutely love it. I've been staring at it for a good 3 weeks now, making hesitant preliminary notes. It's right at the heart and soul of what I do, so it isn't quite as casual or easy to toss off as a usual tag. I was staring at it for a long time, just thinking and thinking, and then Alex at Whatpageareyouon tagged me. So I was removed from the luxury of simply contemplating. I would probably have contemplated it until August. But no, no, this is an agony, but it's necessary. It's June after all. It's well necessary. This is the mid-year bookish freakout tag, the 2020 version. A tag that is perennial. You can do it every year, and it is designed solely for you to, in the middle of June, to take stock of what your reading has been for the current year. And the reason that it's a pause-inducing nightmare for me is because I do an enormous amount of reading, and I do take stock of it. At the end of every year, I have an epic list of the best and worst books of that year in 15 or 16 categories. And I keep preliminary lists all year long, and those lists have fallen into complete disarray in 2020 because of the pandemic. As I stopped getting lots of books, or I got them electronically, which somehow creates a gap in my mind that I don't think to note them. Or publication dates change, some to 2021, so that I have to chase down every book. It's not a question anymore of just looking at my new release bookcase, because I don't have a new release bookcase anymore. I have a couple of new release shelves. And when those are gone, I won't have those either. I'll just have electronic copies. That's going to make the bookkeeping, so to speak, more difficult to do for my year-end roundup of 2020. I am still going to do it. Absolutely still going to do it. It hasn't so far put much of a dent in my reading. As of this morning, I have read 602 books in 2020. That's lower than I would like, but still well within range for me to at least equal last year's numbers. So it's not hurting too bad in terms of how much ground I'm covering, but in terms of my record keeping, oh my, the record keeping is in shambles. And thinking and taking notes for the mid-year bookish freakout tag is a good kick in the pants. It's a good reminder to me to get to this. So this will be step number one. It is the one I'll share with you, and then I'll do all the other steps myself of just tearing through all my documents, all my ledgers, all of my ebooks, just to double and triple check the dates of everything, and add to and update all of those lists. But what this is, even if you don't do that, most people don't make new releases their bailiwick. But what this is nevertheless a chance for you to take stock of your reading in the year so far. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I'm belly aching because it's a huge amount of accounting work that I have to do. But I'm happy to do it. It's fun. It's just time consuming. And I've got a bit of a crush of deadlines, so anything that's time consuming is I look at it with a little bit of a squint. But even so, we're going to go through these, and we're going to take stock of 2020 so far. This is a big one. This is a big one. Lots of fun. Question number one is the toughest one of all. The best book you've read so far in 2020. Of course, I had to break this up into fiction and nonfiction, and these answers are extremely provisional. Extremely so. There are, on this entire list, there are only a handful of things that in June aren't provisional. But even then, we still have 6 months to go. 2020 could upset any of these categories. But for me, for fiction, I picked a relatively recent novel that I read and didn't think much of, and then I was told by a wiser head than me when it comes to reading contemporary fiction to give it another try. And I did, and saw a lot more in it. It's Anne Wright's book, Actress. I really ended up liking it a lot. So right now, provisionally, it is, if not the best novel I've read so far this year, one of the best novels I've read this year. And for nonfiction, a book I've mentioned a couple of times on this channel, The New Despotism by John Keane, which is a brilliant work of analysis of how governmental ruling systems adapt and change to become better at ruling without being any freer. And I took a long, hard look at my estimate. I read that book and loved it. And then I took a long, hard look at that loving to make sure that I wasn't being motivated by 2020 reasons, that I was analyzing the book as in an ether, as it were. And I think I have. I think it is brilliant just no matter when it was written. But boy, oh boy, sticks with me. It really does. So I'm going to use those two for best books so far this year. I'm not sure that either one of them is number one. And I'm not sure even that either one of them will end up on the list of the top 10 at the end of the year. The year is only halfway done. So, but it's going to be Actress by Anne Enright and The New Despotism by John Keane. Then question number 2 is the best sequel you've read so far in 2020. This was easy, hands down. The American People, The Brutality of Fact by Larry Kramer, the late Larry Kramer, which is a sequel to the enormous part 1 of this duology that came out a couple of years ago. And yeah, it was the best sequel that I read this year. And it was also the best fictional experience that I've had this year, just hands down, easily. Just an amazing, weird, powerful, furious book that I'm definitely going to have to reread before the end of the year. Then questions 3 and 4 are very much linked for me, and they are just a list. I'm supposed to give a book, but I can't just give one. Question 3 is a new release that you haven't yet read yet but want to. Now, I can't just say one. There are a whole list of them. I'm going to give you a whole list of them. And the first 3 are all continuations of series that I started and really liked. All 3 of them are having their book 2 come out in 2020. I don't think any of them is out yet. I haven't got any of them yet. But first one is The Lost Book of the White by Cassandra Clare, which is book 2 in the Elder Curses series. I really like Cassandra Clare. I think she's really entertaining, and I loved the first book in this series. Then the next one is The Night Elves, Volume 2. This is The Ruined King by C.N. Crawford. I think C.N. Crawford is an indie author, but it's terrific, fun, sudsy, sexy elves type stuff. It's not Turgenev, but it's really, really enjoyable. And the third one is Joe Abercrombie. It's The Age of Madness, Volume 2, The Trouble with Peace. More sword-wielding, grimdark fantasy that is just terrific. I thought the first volume was just terrific. So all 3 of those are Volume 2s, and those are all coming out. But also The Inside Story by Martin Amis, big fat novel of his based on his his lifelong relationship with Christopher Hitchens. There are view copies out there, and I know people who have them. I have not got one yet, but this one is easily within my reach. Probably the first 3 are as well, but this one is easily within my reach. It's just, I freely admit, I grew complacent over the years, just expecting new releases to come to me. But nobody's in the offices now. That may change as the summer goes on, but no publicists are in their offices now. So those publicists aren't at their computer looking across the room at shelves and shelves of the same review copies and just thinking, well, now that as long as I've got Steve on the email, what about this? They're not looking at it anymore. So that automatic fulfillment has sort of broken down. I need to get a copy of this book and read it right away. Also, The Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the 4th book in the Stormlight Archive series. I would have wanted it anyway, but now that I know that there's a hardy band of booktubers who are lunatic enough to be rereading this series in specifically in preparation for Rhythm of War, I want it more than ever. And also the landmark Xenophon's Anabasis. The Landmark series, Landmark Thucydides, Landmark Herodotus, Landmark Julius Caesar. They are these oversized hardcovers that have translations, in most cases new translations. This is a new translation by David Thomas, of classical authors, and the books are loaded first with maps, as the title would imply, so that you can see everything, the landscape of everything that's happening. And then with tons of other stuff. Introductions, prefaces, huge amounts of appendix on all kinds of factual matters, tons and tons of supporting critical apparatus. The Landmark Julius Caesar is an amazing volume. It's a one-stop place for Julius Caesar. And this is Xenophon's Anabasis, which is a great work of adventure history. It's a terrific read. It would be noteworthy anyway that this is a new English language translation, but this is not just the translation. The point I'm trying to make about the Landmark volumes is that the translation is one among many allures. So that's fantastic. Can't wait to get it. And then question number 4 is the most anticipated release of the second half of the year. Well, we're in the second half of the year, and that, again, I can't do just one book. I'm again going to bombard you with a list. So what do I have here? The Sinner by J.R. Ward, part of her Black Dagger Brotherhood series. Sultry Immortals, that sort of thing. Very not your grandmother's. It's not Mills and Boone type romance. This is scorching, I believe would the word be. But I've read every book in the series, and it becomes habit for me. Also, Volker Ulrich has embarked on a gigantic 2-volume biography of Hitler. We saw the first one on this channel, I believe. I was doing this channel when it came out. They're both huge. This is well-trod ground. Ian Kershaw did the same thing, 2 volumes, 800 pages apiece. But his second volume, Hitler Downfall, is coming out sometime later this year. Then there's The Good American, A Life of Bob Gershony by Robert Kaplan. Bit of a niche interest, but I can't wait to see what Kaplan does with this subject, because this is a figure who has deserved, I hope, glowingly affectionate biography for quite some time. We shall see. Then also, as long as we're talking, not Gershony, but as long as we're talking about Hitler, we're talking about big fat biographies of monsters. Every year, it seems, or every other year, you get a huge biography of Stalin. And I believe this is only the first of 2 volumes or 3 volumes. This is by Ronald Grigor Suny, Suny, gigantic new biography of Stalin. That's coming out later this year. I believe I have a review copy of it. I just haven't. I postponed it, obviously, and I just haven't got to it. Also, Jared Yates Sexton. I don't know how many of you follow his rather angry Twitter feed, but he wrote, "And the people shall rise like an ocean upon your shore," or something along those lines. I always get that title confused. And he has a new book, American Rule. And he's a very angry but very perceptive commentator on 21st century politics, especially American politics. So anything he writes becomes a must-read for me, and American Rule is certainly one of those. Then we have Sabrina Jeffries, the great romance author Sabrina Jeffries. I'm looking to see if maybe I have a book of hers that I can pull out and show you here on the romance bookcase. But she is on here many, many times, but not within reach. Her new one is Who Wants to Marry a Duke? I will take it. I will read anything Sabrina Jeffries writes. Then we have another romance novel. This is Sophie Barnes. This is the book number 6 in the Diamonds in the Rough series, The Formidable Earl. I believe I've read all the other Diamonds in the Rough books, but Sophie Barnes is just wonderful. So, again, I will read anything she writes. And also from the University of Chicago Press, I just got their huge catalog in the mail. Gigantic, full of goodies. Oh, my. But they have one of the books in that catalog is Yellowstone Wolves, a new ecological natural history, a study of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. Their social structure, their adaptations, their behavior, it's the product of a lot of research by a number of authors. I'm always up for reading on the subject. I used to, once upon a time, I knew the wolves of Yellowstone very well. And so none of those wolves are still alive, but this is roughly the same elastic superstructure. Can't wait to read it. Field studies of healthy groups of wolves are always fun. And you see what I mean. Between question 3 and question 4, that's a dozen books, and I could go on. I could do 100 more of these. There are so many books coming out in the rest of the year, or that have been pushed forward to 2021 that I need to read. But we'll stop there. And question number 5 is the biggest disappointment. And in his video, Alex mentions Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. Of course, it definitely qualifies for me as a big disappointment. Maybe not a big surprise. I was going into it expecting to be disappointed, but you can always hope. But all of the things that I've criticized this author for with What Belongs to You were on display in this book even more so. And one of the things, I don't criticize the author, I criticize my own profession. One of the things that I criticized my own profession for in its response to What Belongs to You, which was mindless, hysterical, just eyes up and whites only, over-the-top praise of a fairly wretched D-list book, was even more. It was even worse in response to this book. The tone was, in most reviews that I read, the tone was just a kind of bored acceptance of the fact that, yeah, him and Sally Rooney, they're pretty much the greatest authors who've ever lived. The reviews just sort of started that way and then just moved on to analyze the fly-blown and completely decrepit contents of Cleanness. God help us. So it would count. But another disappointment was nonfiction. It was Daniel Susskind's book, World Without Work. And I don't mean to group it by kind at all with Cleanness, because it wasn't bad. It was just a disappointment. I expected him to dig a little deeper into what automation might mean for the future, and many aspects of automation. And he didn't really do that in this book, so it was kind of a disappointment. I'll read it again before the end of the year just to be sure. A lot of these things I'll be reading more than once. Then question number 6 is the biggest surprise. Again, I want to break this down into fiction and nonfiction, and I could do more. All of these, this is what makes this tag an agony, because I could go on forever on this subject. The biggest surprise for fiction, for me, I'm not sure that it's out yet. It's called The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles. And it's gay fiction, set during the AIDS epidemic, and about the men who returned to the small towns, the Midwestern towns, the Western towns that they fled to the East and West Coast in order to be themselves as gay men. They realized in their one-horse little town that they couldn't possibly do that. And so they had to flee the family farm, the family business, their family, all of their friends. They had to go to the coast in order to have a chance at being a little bit closer to living the life that they knew that they wanted. And then the novel's about the members of that group of men who contracted AIDS and had to return home to die to the place that they had left. And as you could tell from that description, you can tell what my worry was. I went into it thinking this is just going to be incredibly manipulative. That's going to rely on manipulation and nothing else. I've seen a couple of works of gay fiction that do roughly this idea, and they lay on the manipulation with a heavy hand. And this book doesn't really do that. That's what made it a pleasant surprise, is that it doesn't. These are both pleasant surprises. It doesn't really do that. Instead, it was a lot more intelligent than I thought it would be. So I will read it again when I get a finished copy, but if I get a finished copy. And then for nonfiction, the pleasant surprise was Sarah Preston's book Unholy, which is about why the American evangelical movement, the white evangelical movement in America, supports Donald Trump. Why do they support a twice-divorced lech, a twice-divorced, incredibly accused rapist, someone who doesn't read the Bible at all, doesn't know anything about religion, obviously doesn't care about anything like that. It's the most openly cynical use of religion that any president has ever made. And these white Southern Baptist fundamentalist preachers, they might be a little unhinged, but they're not stupid. They know this guy is not a Christian. They know that he doesn't believe, and they fervently support him anyway. And I was expecting that this book would do what so many Trump books do, even when they profess to be critical, and that is to blunt, to pull punches, to use euphemisms. So many books do that, even by people who avow themselves to be this guy's enemies, because I think they have an eye on the purchasing power of Donald Trump's clan base, or maybe they're on some level they're wondering, well, if he wins or if he takes power in 2020, even if he loses the election, if he just seizes the government, I don't want to be lined up against a wall. I might want a job with that administration. One way or another, you can feel these authors, even the critical ones, sort of feathering their own nest on the side. And I went into this book just expecting that would be more of the same. There would be a whole bunch of apologetics. And it isn't. It isn't. It's really intelligent, but it does not pull punches at all. That was a delightful surprise. Then question number 7 is a favorite new author, debut or new to you. For me, this is going to be, I believe, both. I think this is his first book. He's certainly new to me. Dan Gretton's book, I, You, We, Them, a study of what he calls desk killers, people who authorize and keep genocidal and homicidal machinery going without ever pulling a trigger themselves. I thought it was really, really good, and that was just on the first reading. This is one that I am looking forward. I'm going to let it digest for a while, and then later on, in the late summer, early fall, I will read it again, and I have a feeling it will impress me even more. But it impressed me plenty just the first time, and I've never encountered this author before. I don't think he's ever written a book before. Then question number 8 is an unfortunate holdover on the mid-year book Freakout Tag from its YA BookTube origins. I believe it has YA BookTube origins. I'm really hoping that down the... What's the matter, baby? I'm really hoping that down the line, maybe next year, someone could take it upon themselves to remove this question and replace it with a really good one. Just we don't need fewer questions. There still should be a question number 8, but maybe we could remove this one and rewrite it, come up with something else. And if nobody does that in 2021, maybe I'll do that myself. But question number 8 is your newest fictional crush. I only have one crush. Don't I? Don't I, baby? I only have one crush. It's ridiculous. You're reading a book in order to find out who you're going to go to prom with. Please. So, oh God, the tripod's acting up. It hates the question so much. She probably wants to go outside. That's why she's standing on me. So we'll put the spurs to this thing. I am obviously not going to answer question number 8, and I will take it upon myself if nobody fixes this for next year. BookTube has grown up. Okay, it's time we all, especially a certain diehard section of BookTube, realizes there are all kinds of readers out there now on BookTube making videos regularly. So these great old tags that can be repurposed forever really need to be cleansed of their silly tween questions like who's your new fictional crush. So I'm going to ignore the question. Question number 9 is your newest favorite character. And for me, it's nonfiction. It's from Francesca Wade's book, Square Haunting, about 5 female authors at different points in their lives who lived in one particular area of Greater London. And for me, the character in that book is Dorothy Sayers, the author of the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries, the translator of Dante. I mean, all 5 of the women in Square Haunting are really well drawn. Francesca Wade's book is fantastic. But Dorothy Sayers just steals the book. She's so funny and so smart. And so the thing I kept thinking while I was reading the book is this is what Bertie Wooster would sound like if he were intelligent. That was just amazing. So I loved it. I kept waiting for her to reappear. So I'm going to use Dorothy Sayers. A little surprise to me. Then question number 10. Question number 10 is borderline for one that needs a replacement, but I've heard enough of you adults respond to books this way so that I'm going to leave it in, and that is a book that made you cry. In YA circles, the waterworks never stop. Because I guess YA readers read books with their lymph nodes instead of with their brains. But I know quite a few adult readers who don't just cry willy-nilly when they're reading books. So instead of cry, maybe I will broaden this to had a strong emotional impact. And in my case, it was completely predictable. And it had to do with personal background rather than the actual content of the book, which the actual content of the book was a little thin, as always, with this author. This was Jeffrey Masson, the author of When Elephants Weep and a bunch of other books that are, talk about manipulative, and pretty thin. But his latest book is Lost Companions, which is a new book about losing your pets, about what it feels like to go through a grief process that isn't even acknowledged in large parts of society as being grief or as being legitimate at all. I've had this discussion. We had this discussion when I got the book in the mail. I asked the question, for your own lives, when you are grieving for the loss of a pet, is it acknowledged by anybody that you know? Do your older relatives think, oh, I understand then why you're withdrawing? Does your workplace give you the time off? Anything like that. I have been through it many, many times. And for me, I am accustomed to the fact now that my beautiful pointer, Malin, is dead. She's been dead for years. I'm accustomed to that fact. She was a really good dog, sweet as the day is long. But there are some dogs that work on you on a different level than that. And my Basset Hound Lucy was one of those dogs. I had her with Malin. They grew up together. They were each other's best friend. And Lucy's been gone even longer than Malin has. But it still feels fresh to me. There's not a day when I don't think about her. Not a day when I don't miss her. Even though she couldn't stand me and was completely insane. I mean, completely insane. Not oh, Bobo, you're so crazy. No, she saw things. She heard things. She didn't remember basic stuff. She was completely insane, and was always angry at me for one reason or another because I was never doing a good enough job at serving her needs. Didn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not reciprocal. When you love, sometimes it goes deeper than other times, and it isn't a question of. Well, anyway. That loss still feels fresh, even though she's been gone longer than Malin. Her loss feels fresher to me. So reading a book like Lost Companions, of course, was going to make me choke up, and it did, but it didn't have much to do with the author. This author never really does all that great a job with his animal-related subjects. Then question 11 is a book that made you happy. I don't really know how to respond to this. All books, to one degree or another, make me happy, even the bad ones. The fact that they exist at all. The fact that I'm here to engage with them. The fact that this conversation is ongoing and so multitudinous. I mean, just the other day, yesterday, one of you sent me a brand new Penguin classic of Samuel Richardson's Clarissa. That made me overjoyed. I spent a lot of time with that book before I put it on the shelf. But in terms of, to keep it the theme of new releases, I'm going to use David Allen Sibley's new book, an oversized illustrated book called What It's Like to Be a Bird, which is it's a big illustrated, sort of young adult version of his Guide to Birds. It takes 2 or 3 dozen marquee species of birds, gives you new paintings of them, descriptions of their habitat, descriptions of their range, their nature and whatnot. There are all sorts of larger thematic descriptions of how birds behave and what they do and why they do it. It was just a delight to go through, just a delight. So I bet it could be a lot of books like that. Like later this year, there's going to be, if they meet their timetable and if they come out with it, I forget who's publishing it, but later this year there's going to be an enormous, maybe later this year, maybe next year, an enormous atlas of Star Trek. The Federation, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, the Alpha Quadrant in general, the Beta Quadrant, the Gamma Quadrant, the Delta Quadrant, map after map after map in great detail. And I don't know if it's going to happen, but that will certainly make me happy. So lots of books do, but I'll just settle with this one rather than make another list. And then question number 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. You can see them over my shoulder, right where my finger is. A whole shelf of Everyman Library classic hardcovers. That I got a couple of them, and then the rest of you during quarantine sent me a whole shelf of these beautiful books. You can see Peeps peeking out at you there. And there are a whole bunch of others. There's the Tale of Genji, and there's a Trollope volume, a whole bunch of others. Those are gorgeous. I just love them. I love them. And I got a whole bunch of them. I have a whole shelf of them now. That's wonderful. Now I've gone back to simply getting them when they show up at the Brattle. And a lot of times the ones with dust jackets don't show up at the Brattle, so I don't expect it to make a second shelf, but that's adorable. I love looking at that thing. And then question number 13, the final question, is what books do you need to read before the end of the year? And I'm going to give the same answer here that I give every year when I do the mid-year book Freakout Tag, which is all of them. And I know that sounds horribly facile, but nevertheless, all of the major new releases in all of the genres that I follow in the American market. That is my goal. That is my reading scheme. Everybody has one, whether they acknowledge it or not, or whether they've thought it out or not. I've thought out mine. And my reading scheme, I deviate from it all the time. I read backlist all the time. I read self-published stuff all the time. But my overall reading scheme these days, these last 15 years of my life, has been to get a handle, to keep my nose right at water level of the major new releases from the major publishing houses in the 15 or so genres that I read. And every year I am more or less able to do that. I'm certainly able to come closer to doing that than any other person that I know or have ever heard of. Certainly any other book critic. Oh my, I do more of that and come closer to achieving that goal than whole book sections do in some newspapers and magazines. And that is still my goal for 2020, pandemic notwithstanding. So between now and the end of the year, my plan is to read every major new release, all the biographies, all the histories, all the nature books, all the science fiction major new releases, all the mystery, all the romance, all the general nonfiction, all of the science. I'm not at the moment children's books, YA books. I'm not at the moment remembering all of the categories, but there are about 15 of them, and I plan on just charging ahead and doing that. I read a lot, and I plan on doing that for the rest of the year. So I know it's obnoxious, but I am going to say all of them for here. In that sense of the word, everything new that comes out in the U.S. book market that is major for the rest of the year. so that I don't get out of the year and say, so there was an 800-page biography of Francis I. Yeah, I wish I'd got to that. No. When 2020's over, I want to be able to say there were no major releases in 2020 that I didn't read. In other words, when I look at for instance, if the New York Times every year comes out with a long list of the books of the year, and I'm not going to be reading it this year because earlier in 2020, the New York Times came out in favor of the violent military overthrow of the government of the United States. So I'm not reading the New York Times anymore. The book reviews during the day, the opinion section, the list of books at the end of the year. I'm not reading the New York Times anymore. Maybe if they were to issue a groveling front page above the fold 6-inch apology for coming out in favor of a fascist overthrow of the country, maybe then I would, but maybe not. But there are plenty of other places that do. Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, The Atlantic, Harper's. There are plenty of places that come out with lists of the most notable books that came out in the year that is ending. You see all those lists. They start to come out in late November, and they're as thick as snows on the ground by the end of the year. And my goal, among many others, but one way you can shorthand my goal, my reading scheme, is that when those lists are published, I don't want them to include any books I haven't read. They're certainly not going to include any off-the-beaten-path books, which is what you'll get with my list. My list is definitive for that very reason, because I'm going into all the academic presses, because I'm hunting out all the stuff that no one else has talked about. Those mainstream book review lists tend to be an anatomy of bandwagons. These are the ones that made splashes, and that's why we know about them. So we're going to list them, and they are the books of 2020. I want to make sure, if I'm doing my job right, my reading scheme right, then I will have read all the books on those lists, and I'm still aiming to do that. It'll be a little harder. I will have to work a little harder to assess all of those lists and aggregate them. That was one of the conveniences of the New York Times, but if it's a choice between my freedom and reading the New York Times, if they're against my freedom, then I'm against them. So my answer is all of them. And that just leaves tagging. This is tagging people, and this is a tough tag. I don't know how many people have done this, and I'm not sure how many people would want to. A lot of people don't like quantifying their reading this way, and I understand that completely. So I'm tagging people, but you don't have to feel that you are tagged unless you want to. I'll tag Roz at Scallydandling about the books, Bill Ruttenberg at the Ruttenberg Library, Byways and Bookland. Oh my, do you keep stats on your reading year? Sarah at Steeped in Books. She'll probably do something like this herself. It might not be in response to a tag, but I'm sure she'll assess the year. Jayne Catherine on books. I'd love to hear it if you want to do it in this quantifying way. Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. Only books from your shelves. No buying new books, but that is still interesting. There'll still be books in these categories. And that is the mid-year... And of course, Britta. What's your reading year been like? Mina Schatzi. So that is the mid-year book freakout tag, the 2020 version. Oh my. And it is a real kick in the keister to me to how much work I have to do. Oh my. I need to set aside an hour a day for the next 7 or 8 days to get my house in order as to where I stand with 2020 books. If I do that, then at the end of a week, it'll be done, and I won't have to worry about it anymore. But with a ragged task like this, the longer you let it go, the worse it gets. So, and I know that. So I want to thank Alex for tagging me. I don't think he was expecting to bring about this protracted Freudian nightmare, but nevertheless, I'm glad of it, because it's the impetus I need to get to work on this. This is the first step in getting to work in this, is quantifying some of these categories. And I'd love to hear yours. So whether I tagged you or not, if you feel like doing this, I'd love to hear it. But I'm going to wrap this up as usual. My tags went long. Sorry about that. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.